Good evening, friends and family, and thank you for coming to another night with Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Communities. Sorry we were a little late this evening. We had some technical difficulties, but this is definitely a worthwhile conversation to listen to. We have as our guest tonight Dr. Rosita Chatonda, and Rosita has been on our podcast to discuss a number of other issues. But tonight, she is here to talk about her book, The Literacy Gap: Equalizing Education for African Americans Through Literacy. And Dr. Rosita Chatonda, I want to thank you for coming and being our guest tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. As you know, family, we're a nonprofit organization working to enhance the awareness and support of Black businesses. And the discussions that we have, whether it is a business directly, whether it's an author or a topic, it comes back full circle to the businesses in our community and the economy in our community. And that's why this discussion and talking about the literacy of our children, as it has gone back all the way to slavery, and the impact that it's having even today, is a very important discussion. It's all relevant. And so that's why we're having this talk tonight. And we work very hard because we want our people to support our Black businesses, because our Black businesses have an opportunity to circulate the dollars in our community. Our Black businesses inspire and support other Black businesses and causes in our communities. And this is why we had great communities like Tulsa, what was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, what was in Roseland, and so many other unknown communities where our people came together and they set up businesses and they provided the services that they needed in the communities. And so that's why this is really an important topic, and this is why this podcast is so important. And as you know, we are great proponents of our bookstores, and we have a resurgence of Black bookstores here in the Chicago area. Go to our website at rrgbc.org, where you can see the list of business of Black bookstores that we have here in the Chicago area. And I have another one that I want to add that you will see on our website next week. But our bookstores are very important to us. They add validity to our existence. And so we want you to support our Black bookstores. And what we do here, we feature a Black bookstore on our website every month. And I did get in touch with our winner for last week, Mr. Owen, and he is going to receive a copy of the book that we gave away for last month, Owen Lawson, How Black History Can Save Your Life by Ernest Krim. Congratulations. Our bookstore for this month is Burst Into Books. They're located at 119 East 107th Street in Roseland. And you can also contact them at burstintobooks.com. They have a wonderful website. And this bookstore is more than a bookstore. It is a community hub. And they've got book clubs, and they have open mics, and so many activities going on in this particular establishment. They're open from Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 6 p.m., Saturday 10 to 5 p.m. And their phone number is 872-702-4998. That is Burst into Books in Roseland. And the book that we chose for this month is Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey. And this is a pushback on capitalism, white supremacy, using the power of rest, daydreaming, and naps for healing and justice. This is a number one seller. And if you want to an opportunity to win a copy of this book, all you have to do is go to rrgbc.org and subscribe. We pay for the book and the shipping. And what we hope is like what Owen Lawson is going to do. He's going to go to the book joint to pick up his book. So he will have an opportunity to see all of the wonderful books that are at the book joint, and hopefully that will be a relationship established. And so whoever wins this book, we would hope that you would go to the bookstore and pick up the book. If not, we will pay for the shipping to you at no cost. We just ask that you read the book, look at their website, support our Black bookstores. That is very important. We also ask that you go to Save Black Bookstores at change.org and sign our petition, because our local schools and our local libraries should be giving contracts to our bookstores. This happens in other municipalities, and it would definitely help with their ability to thrive and continue to do the work that they're doing in the community. So please go to Save Black Bookstores Chicago at change.org and sign our petition. And finally, we support the Southside Community Federal Credit Union that is located at 55th and Wentworth in the shopping mall there at Garfield and the Expressway. And they've been in our community for over 20 years, supporting people in our community with financial literacy support and loans. They've given loans to people who can't go into some of these larger banks that are making a lot of money off of our people in our communities, but they give back. And they have a plethora of products to offer. They have mortgage loans, they've got car loans, they have micro business loans. They even have some products that you can take advantage of instead of some of these high interest rate payday loans. And they're not just interested in you getting a loan, but they're interested in you. So there is no excuse for us to not have an account at the Southside Community Federal Credit Union, because it's through our opening accounts that enables a bank to thrive. So please support the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. Okay. And then also go to rrgbc.org. You can subscribe and you can make a donation to help our cause to bring these podcasts to you and some of the work that we do to help our businesses here in the Chicago area. And we also have a online store there where you can purchase products that would help us as well. Okay. All right. So let's get to our guest tonight, Rosita. Rosita, the literacy gap, equalizing education for African Americans through literacy. And we know that we have a huge problem. There is a significant gap in the achievement of our children in terms of lower math scores, in terms of lower reading scores. And so, can you address what that achievement gap is looking like today?
Okay. Well, it looks like different things in different schools. And it looks like different things in different schools that service African American students. One of the things that the gap happens when children do not do well on standardized testing, they can't perform, they haven't had the skills developed in order to develop their literacy tools like grammar and spelling and all of those things. So what happened in the late 90s here in Chicago that swept the nation was that the students who were not achieving over 50%, which is they're not average students, they're failed. They predominantly were in inner city schools, and that's why. And because here in Chicago, we have the selective enrollment environment. So all of the students that do well are pulled out of the inner city schools and placed somewhere else. So what that does is create the brain drain because children learn from other children. The teachers teach the lesson, but we know if we don't have higher functioning children in our classrooms, the children will not learn what they need to learn because other students model for them. And you remember when you were in school, the smartest kid in the room. Well, we don't have a smart kid in the room that's scoring a stay 9.9, where everyone tries to excel. We may have all stay 9.5s, because and that five would be the top, you know, and people would aspire to be like that student, that percent or below, because that's all they see. You can't be what you can't see. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a problem. So what happens is that we have a large group of children in inner cities that not only don't have access to literacy in terms of spelling and phonics, because somebody decided, some non-educator, I think it was the mayor here, who decided that, hey, we're moving into a technology age. We want to run our schools like a business. Remember that idea?
Yes.
So way back in the 1995, the mayor, who didn't know any better, said, we're going to run this as a business. What that meant for the students was, number one, we will not have educators at the helm. We'll have CEOs, business people. They'll come in, they'll fix this mess. They'll come in and they will teach our children like they're going to work every day, like they're in a, like it's a business. Well, when it's a business, the computers are now, we have a technology age. So the computers are going to do this fantastic work of spelling for the children, teaching them grammar, doing all of, well, of course, penmanship is out the window because what do they need that for? As you see now, nobody can even sign their name, 20 years later. So we got this problem. We're graduating seniors who cannot sign their name. We have a whole generation of children who can't even write in cursive. And that's due to these policies that happened 20, 25 years ago. So now, or even 30 years ago, so the student in the classroom now has not learned spelling like we learned it. No more spelling bees. I saw on TV recently, I saw, oh, they're trying to bring back the spelling bee. Well, they came into the classroom literally when I was in school, and they demanded that we get rid of the spelling test because, they shouldn't be learning how to spell. You know, that they should be running businesses. That was the
So in
idea.
other words, they don't need to know how to spell.
Yeah, that the computers will fix everything. It doesn't matter that they can't sound out, and it somehow this magical computer was going to teach the children how to spell. It was going to correct the grammar, which is it does, but you have to somewhat know how to sound things out in order to even get the computer to cooperate. So this is what's happened. So slowly we began to erode where every less and less students who have a skill base. They don't know spelling. They don't know phonics. They don't know penmanship. They barely know grammar. Add to the fact that most African American children, and I'll go as far to say is more poor American children, they really don't learn how to speak standard English at home because they speak a dialect of standard English. And where do they learn how to speak English? At school. Where do they learn grammar? At school. When they go home, their parents are not speaking standard English. And so what literally happens is that when the parent when they go home and the parent is speaking Ebonics and the kid is speaking Ebonics, so when I give them the standardized test, that's Greek to them. And all of us as African Americans, I think at some time when we're testing, and especially when we were younger, and we know the content. The teacher has taught it, but for somehow we don't translate over to the standardized test. It looks different to the children. The words are different. They don't understand what it means. And
So
we're
this is
literally
why so this is why you have the disparity between the black children and the white children,
right,
because of this difference in
right,
language.
in language. and
In
and
language.
well, it's their language. I mean, you know what I'm saying. They didn't come here as a result of slavery and have their language passed down historically in a
Mhm.
dialect. They came with their language intact and they taught it, and that's the way they speak. We came with a history and a legacy of which being passed through the oral tradition, and it doesn't look like what they present us when we look at standardized testing. It looks
Mhm.
different. So, and even to some of us, I gave the example today when I was at University of Chicago and I was in this physics class. And now I at that point, I have advanced degrees, but I'm in this physics class at University of Chicago, and I'm trying to pass it. And these white people are so articulate, they're so verbal. They could talk about Newton's first law, and I'm sitting in the back like, I better not say anything,
Mhm.
because, I'm sitting here trying to figure this mess out because they seem to be so verbal and so in such command of the language. And I didn't feel like maybe I don't know anything. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just listen. On the final day, when we had, and their hands were raised every 5 minutes and they were talking. And the final day, when we got ready to take the test, surprise to me, I was the first person to finish. And I finished the test and I went up, and I guess I hadn't said a word all semester. So the professor is like, what? Because the language wasn't there. It was different. Even though I understood all the concepts, obviously, the language wasn't there for me. And that's how the children feel. Okay, these people are just verbalizing everything, not necessarily that they know anything, but they're
Mhm.
just able to articulate their language. Now, we, on the other hand, we have our language, and our language really isn't spoken in standardized testing mode. It's a
Okay.
dialect. So that's what the children experience. And I learned this. There's three things I learned, which made me really write the book. Number one, that when I am giving assignments to my students and they're doing well, they're hands on, they're performing, I'm looking like this is fantastic work, give them the standardized test, they're failing. So
Mhm.
I began to see, well, what's the issue here? Why can't they translate over what I know they know onto this paper? So I began to interpret like an interpreter, just like you would interpret another language, sign language. So I would sit and say, well, this is what they mean when they say this. You see, we just did this over here. We had them, and this is what they mean. And I would say it the way we, in basically a dialect. And so when they transferred over, then all of a sudden I started doing much better on standardized tests to the point where I could get 1 year's growth. And the more I began to explain what the interpret on the standardized test, the higher the test scores would go. And I said, I'm on to something. So whenever we would give tests, I would test my test prep would be sitting and interpreting this is what, and then they would do better. When I left the classroom, I could get 4 years growth in 1 year. That's just how good it was. So it made me so happy because I've been trying to crack the code, say our children can learn. I know they can learn. I'm one of those kids. I know they can learn. So I started feeling good about myself to the point where I said, look, I have got to see if this works school wide. Because if this works school wide,
Mhm.
we got something. So I decided when I went to University of Chicago to become a math science lead teacher. And I just happened to work with this beautiful reading specialist, and she was the lead. So we sat together, put our heads together, and said, look, we would like to get our school off probation in 1 year. Our principal, they were literally chasing her out the door, but we wanted her to go out in style. So we said, look, why don't we get together and let's work together and let's see if use this strategy to get this school off probation. So we began to do things partnered with incentives, partnered with really making the children feel like they could do this. We had incentives. I had Chatonda bucks where I would bring in my Chatonda bucks and the children could buy stuff that I had purchased. I'm a shopaholic, and I would have little toys and gifts and donations that I would say, okay, you can buy Chatonda bus. So I started with positive reinforcement, building them up, getting little dog tags, that said math star, and so they could put it on their chest. So we began to really do emotional healing, really, and making school so much fun. The kids were not only just coming in, they would come meet me at the car. What do you have? What do you have? And just making them totally engaged. When I did my science fair, I had almost 200 projects. Now, normally in our community, we might have one little cute girl, and I didn't know this, that's the way, because I went to Catholic school and they made everybody do this. So when I came to the public school system and they said, you're the science fair coordinator, I said, 200 projects. So I literally thought every student was supposed to do a project. And when we had our science fair, we would have like 200 projects in the gym, you know. So that just engage. It became so much fun. Learning is had to become fun.
Mhm.
And it's not just, it had to become something that I can't wait to get to every day. And we made that environment in that school there that year. And I'm telling you, it worked. We got that school. We were the bottom school in our area, and we became number two in 1 year. So I knew that the strategies that we were using, social emotional, as well as the literacy piece, it could save our children. It could literally lift our children out of poverty, out of ignorance, and give them an opportunity to feel, take ownership of their learning. I love this. I wanted the children to feel about school how I felt about school growing up. I loved school growing up, and school was where I went. I don't care what was happening, I was going to school because that is where I got all of the help, the support, the love, the wraparound services, and everything I needed at school. So
Okay,
that,
well now, as you know, that is not what has been happening for our children, especially in our public schools. And we could say specifically to address what's happened here in the Chicago public schools. And so there's a couple of points here you're making is, first of all, we have a different language. And
Yeah.
when you have a different language, there is a cultural aspect that comes with that. And that has been ignored. And I would go as far to say that it's been ignored intentionally. I know on the front cover of your book here, I see where you have American slavery to segregation. All right.
Yeah.
And so there is a timeline of where there's been a denial.
Mm.
There was initially in slavery a denial for Black people to read. It
Yeah.
was illegal. So I want to speak to this aspect of it first before we go into the English part, I'm sorry, the language part of it, but the systematic policies, the laws that were in place during slavery, and how
Mhm.
that has continued. Those policies have continued to go on to today, and how they're constantly trying to stop our children from learning how to read.
Right.
Because during slavery, being able to rebellion, it meant escape, it meant freedom.
Yeah.
And there was a
And
fear
it still
of
does.
there was a fear on the part of the white establishment that this would happen. And then if you learn to read, there was severe punishment. So there was
Hmm.
fear on the part of Black people in terms of even learning how to read. And I was listening to you talk about how you felt, in a situation, uh, not necessarily feeling comfortable about speaking out,
Hmm.
about what you knew, not feeling comfortable in situation. So this trauma and the systematic policies and behaviors that have continued
Hmm.
are not a fact that we have a language and we have a culture as a people that needs to be addressed, that needs to be acknowledged. And
Yeah.
so when
And
we
that.
look at this, when we look at this timeline, I look at how we were denied the slavery, we were denied reading in
Mhm.
slavery, and then you were talking about what was taken out of the curriculum. Phonics was taken out, curse was taken out, grammar was taken out, library, and it's a similar impact that occurred during slavery, where we were just denied all of that.
Did
So
not.
that's at the
Mhm.
beginning of that timeline of slavery. If you want to make any comment
Yeah.
about that.
Yes, I do, because the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so
Mhm.
so we're looking at, we haven't moved too far beyond that. The denial, it's done subliminally now, in undercover and not covert. It's done in a way that's not overt. So we're having to figure this out, that look, why would these literacy supports be removed? It makes no sense. I mean, these are the
Mhm.
things that we
Right.
learned how. So, what is the motive behind removing these things? Well, we know what the outcome is. It's like 20 something years later, nobody, we got 85% of our children failing and
That's
being
right.
told that they are failures, and not being able, when we know that they're capable. Those of us who have been in the class, we know that our children can master this, and we know that they're able to do it. Sometimes teachers' hands are tied. I used to have this program that I call Sneak and Teach, and they would give us so much garbage curriculum that didn't work. I watched schools close using this garbage curriculum that somebody knew got paid millions of dollars to put into the system, that just didn't work for our children. So what do I
Mhm.
do? mandated to have it, but then I would do like sneak and teach. I had my own set of books. I had, because I'm not going to be looking like a fool at the end of the year with everybody failing. You know, that is not what I come here to do. So I know that if I teach you using this faulty curriculum and that's all, you're going to fail. I'm going to fail. The school's going to close and everything's going to happen. So sometimes teachers have to buck the system. And sometimes if they catch you bucking it, it's your job. But like right now, they have a skyline curriculum that it's supposed to work, but everybody says it doesn't. Now, I've never used it, but I've talked to many. They say it's a problem, and I believe them. So why gets rich off of this? Somebody is hooked up with somebody down, and hey, I got this curriculum, but it's not a fit for our children. So we got to use it though, because the school bought it. I remember when my principal brought Saxon math one year, and I had been teaching algebra at pre-algebra at 7th grade. And I'm telling you, it was so hard to get the up to speed. So one year she said, well, would you mind teaching the 3rd grade, because we can't get the scores up. I took a 3rd grade class, and what they gave me is a Saxon math where they had a lot of pages and doing 1-digit multiplication. And so I had to say to myself, you know good and well, if you teach these kids this 1-digit multiplication, they're not going to be ready for algebra in a couple of years. I mean, 1-digit multiplication in 3rd grade to teaching algebra in 7th and 8th grade. Not going to happen. So I had to just tell the principal, look, I'm going to have to give the kids these little sheets of paper. They can go home and do that with their parents. They don't need me for that. I went to University of Chicago and got a whole new set of books. I borrowed them to use for my class because I was a student there, so they let you. And that's what I taught out of. Because I don't want to look like a failure. And perfectly honest, if the students are failing, you are failing. Anyone can fail. Stay home and you can fail. But when you come into a classroom with a qualified adult and that person is teaching, your students should not be failing. If they're showing up every day, there's something that has to be done to say the kid should not be failing. So what we have to do is we have to really say this is on us. What can we do better to ensure that all of our children, I'm not saying they're all A students, but what I'm saying, if a child shows up every single day and they are sitting before you and there's nothing really psychologically physical, there is not a reason for failure.
Now,
And
see, when I look at
unless,
this, when I look at this timeline, and you go back to the Reconstruction, like 1865 to 1877, after slavery, over 4,000 Black schools were created during that period, but they were underfunded. See, and so again, trying to create some inequity here, trying to
right,
sabotage what's going on. But then the Black community into the segregated schools.
mm-hmm.
We have a connection problem here. I'm seeing connection. Okay, so I believe we're reading it. But during that Jim Crow area, we had the segregated schools, the rise of our HBCUs, our Black literacy rate increased. And this substantiates what you're saying here, because now we have Black people teaching Black children.
Mm-hmm.
rate
and
of our children increase during that particular
right.
period. And so, today, we still suffering from all of this sabotaging, whether it's redlining to create unequal schools, or interfering with the curriculum, to create inferior schools, to create these inequities. And, so the problem is, keep as a subculture. And when you talk about language, again, you're talking about a
Uh,
culture.
when-
You point out, you talk about, they want to say black language is a slang. They want to say, it's not a language,
but all the
and they want to say
linguists,
black culture.
yeah, but
Yes.
realistically, all linguistics and all linguists say that African American vernacular English is a legitimate
Mm-hmm.
language, and it is not inferior to standard English in any way. It is a language that we learned
Mm-hmm.
historically for our survival purposes. So, and it's okay
Mm-hmm.
to speak it. It's okay for our people to speak that language. But we live in America. So we must coach Hispanics are speaking Spanish. Then they're going to say, we don't understand you. But what happens with our language as we begin to speak it, um, it, it's a qualified language to the extent that no one should be saying it's inferior to anyone else's language. So that's number one. But we must also learn their language. And in order to live in America and be successful, we have to learn the standard way of speaking as well. And some people, and you see, someone pointed this out, it's 10 times worse today because of social media. It was bad 15 years ago, but it's 10 times worse because social media, because they're not even really speaking Ebonics. They're starting to speak a whole nother computerized language and how they write with the text and all those things. So we wouldn't look at that and call that an inferior way. It's a different way. So that's the way we should be looking at Ebonics. It's different.
And and this brings in your solution of addressing the language issue as they address ESL. And your
Yes.
solution, it evolves around what really matters. And I know when we look at ESL, it offers support in developing English proficiency while
Mm,
respecting and building on existing language, and a community that is going to develop, an economy that is going to develop, industry that is going to develop in that particular person's or group of people's culture. And so that's how their language is taught. That's how the bilingual support is provided. And so it's my understanding that this is what you're suggesting, that
yeah.
our children get the same level of support and the same level of respect,
Right.
okay, for our culture and for our language.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like BESL, Black English, instead of ESL. It would be BESL, which would be a similar, not exactly the same thing that Hispanics get, but it would. What we're saying is, look, our children should have always been included in the Bilingual Education Act when it was passed, because you said that if a person speaks another language, they would be able to access this extra help. Well, our Our language was declared another language by linguists all over the country and considered another language. So that meant that any student who wasn't proficient in that language should have been given the additional literacy support, especially anyone failing who a child of African American descent or even a white child who's an American student that is failing should have been able to get the same level of support that the immigrant children get.
But what I'm saying is, for that to happen, you have to acknowledge it as a language, and you have to acknowledge the people as having a culture.
Uh-huh.
A culture with a
Uh-huh.
language, that is different, not a
Right,
subculture
right. A culture.
of
A
America,
culture.
not some lower level of speaking, and not some lower level of culture, but looking at our people and the contributions that we have made, and the way we talk, and the way we think, and the way we do things as
Right,
different, irregardless of the fact of how long we have been here, because a lot of what we have contributed has been taken or fused into the mainstream.
exactly.
We've contributed a lot in terms of the language. When we look at the
Uh-huh.
vocabulary, America has a big vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And just as you take a word like kindergarten, okay, that's came from German, the German language, and so you don't take that and you don't diminish
Right,
that and where that comes
right,
from. So the words that we contribute into the mainstream should not be considered as just some
right.
slang
Well,
or
it
something
is by,
substandard.
I can
The
believe
thing.
by anyone that studies linguistics, it is considered a language. And therefore, if it is truly a
Mhm.
separate language, then there's entitlement that comes with that. If if
That's
if
right.
if I am having difficulty mastering standard English because I speak another language, just like immigrants, then our children should have access to the same level of support.
That's right.
And we see that it
That's
works.
right.
It works very well with the immigrant children. They come here, taxpayers pay, they get this wonderful foundation, and they're able to move forward when they finish their bilingual and they're fluent in both
Okay.
languages. We're simply saying that we would like the same thing for the Jaquans, Shanikas, and all those other children that we teach. We feel that they should have the same kind of opportunities. They should be able to.
So let's talk about what that looks like. There's a section in your book, and ask. And
Yes.
I would say a solution, your solution to the problem, but there's an ask. And there are a number of things that you are addressing in terms of what you're expecting Black children to get in an ESL type of program. And the first one is Gifted Academy.
Mhm.
So would you like to address that?
Yes, I'd like to address that because I personally feel that we have waited. Children are much faster than they were 20 years ago. So when we have middle schools, sixth through eighth grade, we really should be addressing them on that level at the third through fifth grade. And I consider that a gifted academy at the third through fifth grade because you'll see that the children will peak at third grade. This is what happens. The children come in, they're excited. Look how nursery school, kindergarten, by the time they're in third grade, they really get it. Like, okay, well, I've mastered. But instead of us moving on and saying the child has mastered this, what we'll say is, let's continue to do the same thing. Well, meanwhile, the child is bored because they've already gotten that. We need a whole different way of looking at third through fifth graders if we're ever going to compete in the world. If we're going to compete with other nations, We cannot wait till our children get to sixth grade to talk middle school talk. They should be getting at the third through fifth grade. And then once they lay that foundation, well, everything else is gravy. And then we look at middle school as a much higher functioning type of situation. We are literally teaching our children at third grade 2 and 3 years below level. And that's why when I be working with the older children and coming down to see, okay, third grade. Wait a minute. No wonder I have so many problems upstairs. These kids are being taught 2 to 3 years below grade level. And
Mhm.
they're doing, and I think some of we have to educate our teachers because sometimes primary teachers, they don't really understand that they're actually teaching 2 to 3 years below grade level. And so we have to up that curriculum through third through fifth grade and bolster it to make it so that children are always engaged. Because that's when we lose children at third, fourth, and fifth grade. And then it becomes a behavior problem. Then it
And
becomes, I hate school.
this can be very stifling for a gifted child,
Oh,
that
yes.
has the ability to go much further. That's like
And we're
holding
holding them
holding them
back.
back, holding them
And
back.
we're literally holding them back. One thing that and the fact that we don't really have middle school. So when they get to this third to fifth grade academy, I completely think that middle school has to be a separate school building. Middle school students should never be in the classroom with elementary school in the school. And I say that because you have nursery, it should never be to eighth grade. It should be to fifth grade. And then we have our middle school that prepares them for higher functioning high school. But when you're in an elementary school and you have a middle school that is in the elementary school, you're still taking the children to the washroom, lining them up on squares like they're in kindergarten. You're still doing all of these basic things that don't allow growth, don't allow social growth. A kid, the older kids, not to mention that in our community, a lot of our children have failed 3 times. So when they're in middle school, sixth, seventh, and eighth, some of them are 16. Now that doesn't happen to the immigrant children because they're protected by law. You can't fail them. But our children get failed. And then they're in 16 and going on 16 and being promoted out of elementary school because they've aged out.
And then,
So
like you
these,
said, earlier, they cipher. They'll take some of those children that are really smart. They'll cipher them to the selected enrollment schools,
yes,
and
they'll
then
take
leave,
them and then,
and then leave these children here. Okay, so I want to
yeah.
I want to hit all of your points before we end tonight.
Mhm.
But this is your ask. This is part of your solution where you talked about the gifted academy. Then you also talked about addressing the impact of historical trauma. So let's talk about that briefly.
Okay. And we talked about in the schools, we're talking about failure.
Mhm.
Failure is trauma for kids, when they have to repeat grades and go through that. But what we say, if we look at the model from the Bilingual Education Act, those children don't fail. You can't fail them by law. Even if they don't ever speak a word of English, they
Mhm.
pass. So that gives this child an advantage. But when I
Sure.
was just quickly, when I was in Mississippi, I was doing grades and I had a group of Hispanic children, and the principal came in and she was saying, "Oh, uh, you have to give these children an A or B," and the Hispanic children. And I said, "Oh," and I said, "But they don't speak English. They don't even speak a word of English." And she said, "Doesn't matter. It's So even though they don't speak English at all, and when I began to erase the grade, she said, "Stop." And I said, "What?" And she said, "He's black. You could fail him."
Mm.
And so that piqued my creed, like what is really going on. So that's when I
Mhm.
started looking at, well, what these kids, they had that much protection under the law, that and it stops the trauma from happening to the child,
Okay.
and the child is very well taken care of, and thinks that they are much smarter and brighter than the other children, simply because they're protected and our
Right.
children are not.
Right. And okay. And so the next ask here is research based assessment tool to identify language deficits.
Okay, so we need a tool. We need a tool to, like everything else, to say, and say what a tool is what we use to identify weaknesses in education or failures or inabilities that students have testing. We need to develop our own, to develop that, to see whether or not our children are can accurately handle and understand standardized English. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's one thing, we need to make sure that they can articulate the language, and we need
Because
an assessment.
I know one of the things with the bilingual assessment is to determine whether the child is having difficulty. Is it because of the language, or is it because of some cognitive
Yes,
disability?
yes,
So
yes,
this is what you're talking about.
yes. And we're talking about a lot of the things have already, they're in place. They're just not in place for our kids. They're in
Hmm.
place for others. And we can learn lessons from that. If it works for these children, why not? Why not for our children?
Okay. Okay. And then number four is researching funding for Black children who lack proficiency in reading. And we know funding is a huge, because it's the underfunding of our schools that
Mhm.
have really harmed our children.
And researching for funding can be volunteers, it can be donations, it can be funding in a variety of ways. It just doesn't have to mean, oh, give me a lot of money. It means give a lot of resources. We can get resources from teachers that tutor, that volunteer. There are a variety of ways we can receive funding for non for
Okay.
profits, from people just coming in. It doesn't have to be just cash dollars, it could be tutoring and many, many other things.
Okay. And
Mhm.
then the next ask that you have is to adopt a curriculum for those below the standard of six.
Yes. So a curriculum, yeah, we can't. What goes on in our system now? Everything is geared toward the higher functioning student, and one size doesn't fit all. So a lot of times we have these higher order thinking activities that are going on with our very developed and successful students, which we love them. But when we go to try to adapt that and use it on kids that have all of these deficits and have, it just doesn't work. So that's what we're talking about, developing, curriculum that fits the need of the children that's sitting before you, not the ones that, are often into the Ivy League schools and into the higher functioning school. Because, and we want to get that child to the point where that child is able to access that kind of education.
Absolutely. And I think including Black history, including Black studies, including Black authors is very important, because it brings them home. It's something that you can relate to. It kind of reminds me of the movie Sounder, when the young boy went off looking for his father,
Mhm.
and he found this lady, and while he found this little school, and he saw these Black children in this school, and he saw them learning, and he saw this teacher teaching them, and he had been going to a white school. His mother, I think, had created a relationship with this woman that was trying to help him, as far as his reading to go to the white school. But when he went to this black school, it was something about that environment, that context that he could learn in. The stories, the examples that the children were giving about their
Right.
experiences, he could
He
relate
could
to.
relate.
And so that's very important.
And I will tell you
That is.
on a personal level, I have grandchildren that were brought up in Iowa. And when their
Mhm.
parents brought them here, and in Iowa, it's so free. I remember going to my son's graduation and literally leaving my purse on the swing in front of the house. I was so excited about my son graduating. When I cast said, "Oh my God, I left everything." When I got back there, the purse was still sitting there, waiting for me to come get it. Nobody
Mhm.
bothered. My grandchildren could go play. They could just have fun, 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 fun. All in Iowa, there were no restrictions. They could ride their bikes. Didn't have to worry about all the gang violence. And when they came here, I was just so, I said, why would they bring them back here? And I said, well, do you all like it here? And they said, yes. And I said, you like it? And they said, yes. And I said, better than Iowa? And they said, yes. I said, why? And they said, the people like us better.
That's right.
And I said, oh my
That's right.
God, my grandchildren obviously were experiencing what
Oh
they
yeah.
didn't know was
That's right.
discrimination. And they had no way to
That's
articulate it.
right.
But when they got here, they had they're around all these black people and they're welcome like them and they're just at home. And we were thinking all the time that they would be better off down there. But they're
Hmm.
saying, I'm at home. The
That's
people
right.
like me. I feel
That's
good.
right.
you
That's right.
know.
And that's
So
important. That's important to them, that I'm accepted. You
yes.
know, this is part of the trauma, of not being accepted.
And those environments, you're just not. And I personally, I grew up and I went to a high school where there were 13 black girls and 1,300 white
Mhm.
ones. So I understand what that feeling is. It's like my last year, but it was so funny because my last year, we went there for 3 years and it was just so toxic. And my last year, as many of the Catholic high schools do, they don't want you to graduate from there when you're and black and we little 13 black girls and 1,300
Mhm.
at this affluent white all girls school, and they don't want you to graduate. So your senior year, somehow you become the worst student in the world. They can't
Mhm.
deal with
Mhm. Mhm.
it. So they called us in the office and my mother was in there, and I was really sick of them at this point. And my mother was in there and she just wanted us to graduate from there. And she was like, oh, and she's struggling to pay this tuition. And I'm sitting there with these people, these nuns, and they're saying, oh, no, no, they can't come back. They can't. And my mother was just, and I just looked at my mother and said, please stop begging them. I
Yeah.
said, they don't want us here. And then I must have been really kind of out of pocket because I looked at my mother and I said, they don't want us here. They don't like us. Let's get the hell up out of here. So
That's
my
terrible.
mother looked and she said, well, I guess they won't be going back. But then we went to Sin on the north side. We lived on the north side. So I did graduate. There were a lot more blacks and it was the best year of high school I had. So
Being
I do
accepted,
understand.
being accepted, being wanted,
Yeah,
it's important.
not being just like they
It's
don't
important.
want you here. You felt that, that
Right.
sting of, you don't belong. So it's important, like
Absolutely.
in the movie Sounder, for our children to be in environments where
Yes.
they feel whole. And we should not have
That's
to
right.
send them outside of Natasha Dunn talks about that all the time. We should not have to transport our children way out to places where they're not wanted. Our
That's right.
school should be up to par.
That's right.
We should,
And
and
knowing that they are not wanted, you're not going to get what you need to
no,
thrive.
you're not going to get the
Absolutely.
full experience of a high
Right.
school.
Of learning,
Yes.
of learning.
Of, of
So
learning, of socialization, of any of those things.
that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
And so the next item is online portal, providing an online portal to teach Black English.
Yes, yes, that now that's the fun part, you know, of just really teaching people. And when you think of it, we've actually taught a lot of white people our English, and they have adapted it into the mainstream culture. A lot
That's
of the
right.
things
I
that
said
we
that
have
earlier.
taught, yes, they
Hmm.
have adapted our language into the mainstream culture, and it's not so stiff. And a lot of our sayings, I hear them some, so they're actually, and doing that actually makes you feel proud. Makes that someone else values how you're speaking to the extent that they want to emulate it. So that's wonderful.
Well,
That's
that can
wonderful.
make you feel proud, but on one end, it also in some way nullifies the fact that this is your culture. This is coming
Yeah,
from you, and especially when it comes to Black people. Now, when it comes to other people, other cultures, whether it's Asian or Hispanic or German
yeah,
or Italian or what have you, it's validated and it's respected as whether they take it on or
exactly.
not. When it becomes when it's Black, we can put it into the mainstream, and it really at some point down the road it doesn't belong to you anymore. Because you're not
It's part of
validated,
the American culture, and
right? And
that
it's part of
really
the
is the
American
fact.
culture to not validate you as a Black person with a culture and with a language.
Yes, and we bring so much to. Can you imagine America
Oh,
without us?
please.
I
That's
mean,
right.
we bring.
I had asked you a question once about, I wonder what it would have been like if the Great Migration had never occurred and Black people stayed in the South. I know it probably would have been another civil war, because the oppression and the aggression against Black people was so strong.
Mhm.
Many Black people were fleeing up here to get away from a lot of that, but we also walked away from a lot of our wealth and
Yeah,
what we were building. As I said, we built over 4,000 schools in the South.
and
And
we
what else
came.
could we have built? And then when we talk about, well, the Harlem Renaissance would have never occurred, but jazz music and blues was coming from there, you know.
Yeah,
So
yes.
so that was all
Yeah.
a part of the problem. So I always wondered what it would be like, if we hadn't had that. Um,
Well, I do. Like I said, I have family members that did not come,
right.
and they're down there, and they have done incredibly well. They stayed on the land. They kept their land. They used their land to finance their education. Almost everybody down there is a doctor, a lawyer, or a PhD.
Hmm.
Every last one of them. They were able to do that because they had the foundation and money and,
And they
and the
had the
reason
support.
and the
They had the
support and their
resources. They
school.
had they had the support. They had the support.
And they
That
had
was
the
the most
schools
important
like
thing.
Tougaloo and all of those other historically black colleges that were developed down there. They had access to all of that. So I
Hmm.
people did stay. And then I compared their lives to ours and we did okay. But if we
Okay.
had been down there, I do believe we would be well known at this
That's right.
point. Hmm.
Okay. And lastly, confirm Black English as a second language.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. It
Hmm.
is a bona fide, and that is what we need to work on. It is a language to itself. We need to respect it, we need to protect it, and we need to make sure that we say to everyone, this is our language. We're not just coming to your schools to learn your language. We have pride. Every race has its own language. And we have to
That's right.
say, why aren't we saying this is ours? This is our language.
That's right.
And we're comfortable in it.
Mhm.
We're very good at speaking it. And so just like you're good at speaking yours. And just be proud of it. Everything we have, we tend to diminish it, but we have to look at the fact that the oral tradition, we did not have the books and the structured things that everyone had, but through the oral tradition, we learned a language. And that language is with us,
Mhm.
and we should be proud of it. And for the sake of our ancestors, we should make it legit. Because when we do that, we
Absolutely.
legit our grandparents. We legitimize their languages and their life and their contributions. So, yes.
That's right. We
Hmm.
legitimize our culture as a people.
Yes.
That's what
Hmm.
needs to be acknowledged and respected. That is what is acknowledged and respected in that ESL program.
Yeah.
Their culture is respected. And
Yeah.
so that's equally as important. So
Yeah.
Rosita, I think you're on to something. I think this is a great idea. Um, and I'm wishing you much success with your book. And I know you have speaking engagements. And where can people purchase your book now?
Well, on Amazon, go under the literacy gap. We also had a book signing today. We'll be doing another one July 5th at the Woodson Library. One of the things with when you buy on Amazon, I ask people to at least write a review. The way that Amazon works, you don't really get a lot of money for your books. They get about 75% of your profits. But they do, yeah, that's a lot. It's several. But but they do provide the platform for people all
Mhm.
over to purchase your books, and so that's what you're paying for. And
Okay.
this year, every year, what Cost Teachers does is we have a Juneteenth. We're kicking off a Juneteenth scholarship. And this year, in the memory, and at the back of the book, you'll see there's memorial pages that for people who will be upcoming for our scholarship. So we have Philip Jackson, and we have a memorial page for the wonderful brother Philip Jackson, for Mr. Henry English, for our beautiful cast member Carl Floyd Bibbs, who will be doing the Juneteenth scholarship, and most of the money on off of Amazon goes to that scholarship.
Okay. Well,
And
well,
yeah, and the last one is Earl Kelly Price. You might not know of him, but he's a cast
yes, I
member in
know him.
yes. So
Yeah, I
if you
remember
were in
him
the system,
through the Chicago
yeah,
Teachers Union. Hmm.
yes, the
Absolutely.
powerful Earl
Union rep.
Kelly Prince. He deserves so much respect that he did not get from the union after building it and working there for 27 years. So we talk about Earl and our heroes. These are our heroes.
Okay.
Unsung. And my next book, now that I've be pumping them out one by one, is going to be a 30-year anniversary on the history of education and school reform in Chicago. What happened after the 1995 Amendatory Act? The name of it is called At Rainbow's End. And I'm hoping to have
Okay.
that one out this summer. And that one's going
Okay.
to be a real read. And I do have a whole chapter on honoring our unheard activists here in Chicago. We need to lift them up. These people work for free, they're community activists, and they're unrecognized. So I try to honor them and
Absolutely.
let the people know, look, we've got people on the ground here. And I mean, we need to honor them. So that's what we do.
Well, Rosita,
Uh-huh.
Right. We're kind of running out of time here,
Yes,
but we do appreciate the work that you have done in the community, the work that you have done within the Chicago Public Schools. Definitely, family, get a copy of this book. I'm sure soon it will be available in stores here in Chicago as you
yes,
go and have your book signings. So
yes.
definitely you can check our Black bookstores. Also, for the literacy gap, something that's very important that we need to address. And so,
Thank you
Rosita,
so
I want to
much.
thank you for what you're doing, and I want to thank you for coming to the show tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was yawning a little bit because we have had a full day at our book signing,
Sure.
and we it was very exciting, and we sold a lot of books, and we had a lot of fun.
Okay,
Yes.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, family. So thank you for coming tonight. Please go to our website where you can watch this podcast and our other podcast with Black business owners here in the Chicago area, artists, authors. We've had a number of people on our shows. And most of all, please go to rrgbc.org where you can make a donation to help support our business, and we want you to support our Black businesses here in the Chicago area. That is very important. So we want to thank you for coming
Thank
and have a
you.
good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it.